Have you ever wanted to be a superhero but didn't have superpowers and don't know where to go to get super skills? Well, here. It's here. Here's the place to get those super skills. That's what I meant.
Subscribe.
So when it comes to superheroes, I don't think it's much of a stretch for me to say that martial arts skills are amongst the first things to develop. And for non-superpowered people, it's the most essential skill. There's a lot of martial arts. And every martial art that you get into is going to specialize someplace else and give you a different conclusion in your art. So that begs the question, which martial arts is best for a real-life superhero? So I'm going to approach this in a sort of tier list format, and I'm doing it unscripted, kind of blind, mostly because I think that'll give a good opportunity to teach about the kind of things that you're going to have to weigh, options, your pros and your cons, things you're going to want to consider when you're choosing your martial arts. Weighing it blind also will open it up better to like a discussion than a formatted top 10 list, I think. So with that said, let's get ranking some of these and hopefully we learn a thing or two. Alright, we're starting off pretty strong with wrestling here. This is the hard one. So first and foremost, when it comes to combat sports, fights in general, you've only got a handful of options hand to hand. You could strike somebody, you could grapple them, you could take down / throw them, right? Some martial arts will cover all of those broadly, and others, like wrestling here, only really focuses on one of those things. It's a specialty martial art. But grappling is a pretty high tier specialty to be in. Not only that, wrestling itself predates written history. Wrestling is basically like humanity's default fighting system, alright? If you're gonna roughhouse with your friends, you're gonna wrestle. You're gonna wrestle. But grappling in general is just better anatomically. Human bodies are more built to actually, do a grappling thing. So if you're gonna specialize in that, in anything, then sure, grappling's good, and then for a hero especially, then we want to be as non-lethal as possible. We want to keep the peace and de-escalate. So a grappling sort of technique is probably preferable, especially if it's a one-on-one fight. Then if you could do takedowns, you're winning. You're winning, all right? Wrestling gives you good control, and it's very useful for de-escalation, but multiple attackers, that's not happening. You're not going to be learning any strikes. You're not really going to be learning much when it comes to like submissions, like actually choking somebody out, right? Because, well, modern day wrestling is more sporty, so that also weighs it a little bit. So with that said, it's definitely pretty high tier. A tier maybe. I'm hesitant to put it in B tier because that feels a little too low for how prominent wrestling is in things like MMA. But at the same time, it's an incomplete system. It's only good for one-on-one, and for the most part, you aren't going to be learning anything. I guess that's it. You know what? No, now we'll move it up to A tier. There we go. Well, actually, my bad. You don't even really touch striking. So because of that, I'm gonna have to bring it down to B. I'm sticking to my guns, sticking to it. I know wrestling's really good, but before a superhero, you need a little bit more variety. All right, boxing. Boxing is another fundamental one here because, well, as I mentioned, you got rows, submissions, and you got strikes. Boxing is like, you got the best hands with boxing, alright? Not only that, you're gonna get the best hands in the least amount of time. I would say somebody who's been boxing for 3 months would probably be a lot of traditional martial artists who have been doing it for 3 years. That might be a little different at the 10-month to 10-year mark, but who knows? Furthermore, you're not gonna be learning any submitting, you're not gonna be learning any kicks, you're only learning hands, but it's really good at hand. Not only that, but boxing also focuses a lot on condition, strength conditioning, toughness, endurance, right? And these are also really, really important when it comes to martial arts and for superhero, huh? So where do we put it? It's got similar problems to wrestling in terms of it's very narrow in what you end up learning. But I think boxing is even more fundamental than wrestling is when it comes to footwork, defense, timing, distance, getting into the rhythm of a fight, all of those things. Boxing is like a bread and butter for hands, all right? I think boxing belongs in A tier, all right? That's just me, though. Karate. All right. Okay. This is where things start getting a little bit more broad because karate does involve a little bit more of a complete system. Not a complete system. That's a different thing. We'll get into that when we get to a complete system, but it definitely covers aspects of both of these. You got strikes, you got some clinches. There is a bit of variety. That's for sure. Also, this is where we're gonna get into martial arts actually getting more into like a lifestyle thing, you know? Mentality, teaching you about mentality. I mean, okay. I don't want to step on the feet of boxers or wrestlers when it comes to saying mentality. Discipline is always requirement when it comes to martial arts. But I mean in terms of putting the art in martial arts, right? Okay. However, with that said, karate does also have quite a lot of sport influence because it's another tournament martial art. But even though it has a tournament, but it also does have dirty tactics. You know, there are like eye strikes and groin kicks and stuff like that you wouldn't get in something like boxing or wrestling, because those are really only competitive for the most part. So with that said, there's one more aspect to hit. Tournaments are good. You do still need to, you know, have good reactive time to score points and whatnot, but for the most part, you're not going to find a whole lot of sparring. You're going to find a lot of katas. And running through techniques and drills are good for muscle memory, but they're not the best when it comes to, well, fighting. The best way to learn how to fight is to fight by sparring or fighting. A lot of karate classes are focused towards children, frequently, not all the time, of course. And there are, you could find plenty that do spar, or you could just spar with one of your friends as well. Keep that in mind when talking about like traditional schools not sparring and whatnot. You could always find a sparring partner, but again, you might be hard pressed to find a school that includes sparring just on its own. And honestly, I would think if somebody is regularly just street fighting or sparring, right, without training, but they are regularly like having to react and figure it out on their own, they just go, I don't know, they fight a buddy of theirs every day for like a couple years, I think they would also beat somebody who just drills techniques just because they've done more fighting. They sure, the karate guy might be better at technique, but if you want to get good at fighting, fight. With that said though, tournaments are a decent substitute that you will find in practically any karate class. That's for sure. So I'll give it a B tier as well. All right, we got Jiu Jitsu Prime here, the first one. Now, Jiu Jitsu is a complete system. This is what we were talking about here. You learn strikes, you learn throws, you learn joint locks, you learn chokes.
I got beans, greens, potatoes, tomatoes, lamb, rams, hogs, dogs, chicken, turkeys, rabbits, you name it!
Weapons, you learn how to use weapons. You learn dirty tactics, and you learn philosophy, that mentality I was talking about. So this was our first martial art that is a complete system. So if you're poor and you can only afford one to go to once a week, then this might be a better choice for you than something that is only like specializing in one thing if you want to broaden your horizon. Now, mind you, maybe you have more money and you can just afford to take a boxing class and a wrestling class. We'll get into that. Trust me, we will get into that. But we're not there yet. So, normal jiu-jitsu. For a superhero to know jiu-jitsu, it is a very good base, and it is a good broad martial art. I think it belongs in B tier alongside karate. That's fair. But let's move on to Brazilian jiu-jitsu, the big brother that ended up taking over the MMA scene. Basically, early 1900s, Michio Maeda starts teaching jiu-jitsu and judo in Brazil, and then the Gracie family just kind of took what worked and only what worked, and it sort of just became a ground dominant combat. In fact, I think if we could summarize Brazilian jiu-jitsu in like anything at all, it would be like rolling. That's it. You just roll around and wrestle with people. Nowadays, it's primarily emphasizes on rolling with an opponent with like grapples and submission, right? So we're going to be running into that same problem of, well, you're not going to learn a wider variety of things. In fact, there's a very minimal amount of strikes and whatnot involved, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But it does work with live sparring, actually using it against a resisting opponent, and it really focuses on keeping what works, and I like that a lot. So it's kind of like wrestling, but just like a step above, because it does include full submissions rather than just trying to win a point. And it does also focus somewhat on opponents who are going to be doing more than trying to submit you. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu spends a lot of time in the MMA scene, so it's proven up against people who aren't just rolling with you. They're also trying to smack you in the face, maybe, you know? So because of that, I think it puts it above wrestling, comfortably in the A tier. Next up, we got Kendo, the first martial arts that is weapons only. I mean, Kendo just means way of the sword, so that's what it is. I felt like we got a lot of these hand-to-hand combats with one specialty interest. So let's get a specialty interest on some weapons, right? But Kendo was kind of made as a way to keep sword fighting alive when you didn't need to sword fight anymore in Japan. So that makes a huge consideration when it comes to its efficacy. Furthermore, in the grand year of 2025, sure, yeah, I will go ahead and say that a superhero should probably know how to use a weapon more than a boxer or like a professional martial artist, right? Which is why a complete system is getting a more higher consideration than an incomplete system, because, well, you're not just a martial artist, you're not just going in the ring, you're a superhero. You might need to use, magical ancient swords that, wield cosmic power. You gotta know how to wield a sword to do that. Whatever. Or, or just some dual batons. That's also an option. With that said, let's be real for a second. Nobody's getting in sword fights nowadays. Everybody's strapped, okay? And if you did use a sword to try to solve some kind of physical altercation, you are probably going to prison, alright? You shouldn't be whipping out a sword. You should be using non-lethals, especially if you aspire to dress up like a superhero and go out and help people, right? Having a deadly weapon like that is 100% intent if you are also dressing up with the intent of going out and trying to save somebody's life, right? Because, well, unfortunately, what the court uses against you is you have no reason to be doing that. You're not a cop, you're not, you're just a civilian, so you going out for the intention of, I want to save somebody's life, but then you carry a deadly weapon with you is the same as saying, I am probably going to need to use this deadly weapon and kill somebody, which is why it is intent. So with that said, if you only learned how to sword fight and didn't learn a whole lot of other hand-to-hand combat skills, I don't really see exactly how useful that's going to be for a modern-day superhero. This isn't saying weapon skill isn't a consideration. We'll get to that. All right, now my darling child, my martial art, Kung Fu. I mean, I took quite a few, but I stayed in Shaolin for the longest period of time because I enjoyed it. I just liked it quite a bit. This is another complete system. In Shaolin, it's sort of like ancient MMA, okay? Because people think Kung Fu or Shaolin is the name of the martial art, but Kung Fu just means hard work over time, right? There's many different practices within Kung Fu, and each of these are specialties of different types of attacks. You got strikes, grappling, joint locks, weapons, a whole lot of weapons in Shaolin. But you also have the philosophy and Qigong and conditioning. It's the whole package. It is a complete system. Now, with that said, I'm making it sound really, really good because, well, in theory it is. But we've seen this problem before. A lot of Shaolin classes don't really spend any time sparring. You might do some Shuaijiao. That was common for my classes. We would it's basically like it's just Chinese wrestling, alright? But we wouldn't do any striking sparring other than Paksao. I guess we did Paksao, but that's not really the same. That's conditioning. No, for the most part, my sparring came with asking my classmates to spar with me. It wasn't really ingrained into the school besides the wrestling, which is still good, by the way. I'm gonna go ahead and do myself a favor here and drop it in the A tier. All right, I think I'm gonna move on before anybody comments on this, and start saying what you want to hear. Wing Chun. So Wing Chun has come from Shaolin, but it was founded by a nun, alright? She basically wanted to take all this flowery kung fu and turn it into just the most direct, efficient, minimal thing. The style got really popular thanks to Ip Man and then his student, Bruce Lee. Oh, we'll get to him. It mainly claims to be utilized for beating larger opponents with, just defense and striking at the same time. Attack the center line, protect your center line. No wasted movement, looking for the shortest path to take down the opponent. In theory, again, this would be great. It's really good at close quarters combat within this elbow range here. Really good for rapid fire strikes. I'm a big fan of the circular punches that Wing Chun has. Good reflex training with the wooden dummies, but we again have a lack of sparring. No live pressure testing of the martial arts. And furthermore, Wing Chun has a particular reputation when it comes to a couple masters taking on boxers and whatnot and getting absolutely floored. But even if you didn't have the typical traditional martial arts problem, Wing Chun also just suffers at a problem of range. Pretty weak at the far kicking distance, and it doesn't do any groundwork either. It's not a complete system, but it does still have a lot of fundamentals and techniques that yet you could definitely still use. It is 100% still usable because Bruce Lee took some things from it and used it, but it's not something that all of it is useful. So let's put it in C tier. Taekwondo. Alright, we covered the top tier punching martial art. This is the top tier kicking martial art. This here would be our primary long range striking art. You got punches and cross step kicks for your medium range, and you got your clinches and grapples for your close range elbows, and then for your long range you got your big spinning kicks and your high fast sweeps, low sweeps. I didn't mean to say high. Now Taekwondo also, it doesn't necessarily spar, but it does do a lot of tournaments and tournaments used to KO. You used to be able to get knocked out during a tournament, no problem. And plenty more Taekwondo classes spar than you would probably think, so it doesn't suffer as much to the traditional martial arts problem, but it also doesn't really focus that much on hand strikes or grapples or ground techniques or anything like that. And because it's Taekwondo has kind of been sportified a bit, there are a lot of rules to consider because you're probably going to be using it in a point-based tournament. So sometimes that can affect your martial arts efficacy. But not too much with Taekwondo, because you still are trying to score on a resisting opponent similar to karate, but it's just kicks. So we're going to put it in the B tier with these other guys over here. Alright, Aikido. This one's also got quite the reputation. A bit of a bullshido. bit of a McDojo. Well, no. Aikido is another grappling and throwing martial art. There's a lot of throws in it. It came from using a sword and then taking away the sword. It's not a complete system, but it may have come from one. It mostly focuses on redirecting your opponent than it does trying to just strike them down, right? And again, this is something that sounds great in theory for a superhero. Redirect your opponent, try to take them out with the least amount of violence as possible. But yet again, we run into the lack of live sparring. And I think reputation for Aikido in particular has really stunted its number of practitioners. And the less practitioners you have, the less people you see who are going to compete in a sports setting. And sports settings, unfortunately, do dictate how popular these things get, which the more popular it gets, the more it gets tested in a ring and proves its efficacy, right? So it's kind of a death spiral in a way. But even without that death spiral, Aikido definitely still struggles. It's got a big focus on these large, whoa, bring that back down. Uh-oh. Where are we? All right, there we go. On these large circular movements, right? Very, very committed to these strikes, instead of a more actual grounded approach where you're probably going to want to test your range and stuff and focus on distance. Aikido assumes that, nah, you got it in one throw. Furthermore, these schools in particular have a lot of very complicit students when it comes to demonstrating techniques sometimes. We're gonna put it in D tier. Yeah. Basically, if you took all the problems that a broad martial arts would have in terms of efficacy, but then took out all the broad aspects and just focused solely on really difficult takedowns that probably won't be able to be used in a real fight due to, how much setup it takes, then you have Aikido. That's where we're at with that. All right, Muay Thai, another big hitter. Muay Thai is a pretty brutal martial art. It's known as the art of 8 limbs. When it comes to strikes, Muay Thai does strikes. Muay Thai's got a lot of strikes. If Taekwondo is like the king of kicks and boxing's like the king of hands, Muay Thai is like the king of knees and elbows. But it also has hands and kicks. You got big old heavy roundhouse kicks, straight punches, slicing elbows, knees, lots of knees. And not only that, unlike something like Taekwondo, clinching onto your opponent is still a very central thing. Muay Thai might be an S tier. It might be. Hold on. Because they also do a lot of conditioning, like shin conditioning, knuckle conditioning, non-stop sparring. It has limited ground game though, and there are no weapons. Sure, it's not a complete system, but it's almost complete in terms of hand-to-hand combat. Almost. I think it belongs in S tier. I think we got our first S tier with Muay Thai. Hell yeah. Alright, next up, we got Eskrima. Now, remember when I was talking about weapons training still being a valid thing for superheroes specifically? Well, this is where Eskrima comes in, okay? So while Kendo is pretty much just focused on the sword, right? Eskrima is a lot more dynamic, right? You could just pick up 2 sticks and you could use these fundamentals. And it translates to hand-to-hand combat as well. You could do 1 stick in one hand, no sticks, 2 sticks in both hands, and you'll still learn techniques that include grapples and throws and disarms even. Then you can translate that to an improvised weapon practically wherever you are. Eskrima is a pretty fundamental martial art now in my eyes when it comes to modern day weapon combat, because we aren't really using swords, axes, and spears and stuff. We're using things that we can find within our general vicinity, which is most likely going to be a stick-like object, which is my argument for learning how to use a staff. Points to Shaolin Kung Fu. I'm just saying. Anyways, with that said, one major problem we're going to find that I didn't really mention with these other ones that are down here for other reasons, you're gonna have a hard time finding a school for this, first off. And of those schools, yeah, sparring is also not too frequent. I mean, you don't want to smack each other with sticks. So yeah. The empty-handed combat can be a little bit shallow. It exists, which definitely gives it points above Kendo here, but it's not large, right? It's not very in-depth. However, I'm hesitant. I'm not going to put it in C tier. I don't think it belongs in C tier, because this is about how useful is it for a real-life superhero. For a real-life superhero, this probably belongs up either in B or A. I don't really want to put it in A tier, because if you learned only Eskrima, you're gonna run into problems. All right, you need something more. So let's put it in B tier. I feel like C tier is where we're in that. You can get good things from it, but that's about it, like there's plenty of good things to get from Wing Chun, but I would recommend just taking those and investing your time into a different martial arts. Hell, I've taken things from Aikido. I had a boxing teacher who used to take Aikido before he became a boxer, and he taught me a couple things that were actually still useful from his Aikido days. You know what? Actually, pause real quick. Speaking of which, when martial artists talk about martial arts and their efficacy in terms of one another, it could be easy to denounce one in comparison to the other. But the reality is, only 1% of the population learns any martial arts at all, and even fewer of them are actively practicing those. So even if you're running with something like Kendo or Aikido, you're probably going to be better off against your average Joe anyways. There's still something to gain from Aikido. There's still something to gain from Kendo. With that said, there's a lot to gain from Capoeira. So Capoeira came because, well, African slaves needed a way to disguise that they were learning how to fight. They disguised it as a dance, but they were actually doing combat training. They turn it into something of a game, that way they can avoid punishment. So in that way, it's martial arts, but it's also rhythm. It's also a cultural identity. So those things are important to consider when it comes to Capoeira, especially when it comes to the aspect of a real-life superhero, because, well, something to remember is that it's not all fighting, right? Sometimes it's connecting. Sometimes it is deception. And sometimes it's acrobatics, which is something Capoeira here has that not a lot of others do. Maybe Shaolin, maybe Taekwondo a bit. But these others don't really focus that much on any kind of acrobatic type of skills. Except Capoeira? Capoeira goes pretty heavy in it. I guess so does Shaolin at the monastery. And there's some Taekwondo classes where I see them doing some like crazy flips and stuff. But Capoeira, you learn that as part of the martial arts. You know, cartwheels, flips, and cool dance moves. And it's pretty underestimated at how bringing an unorthodox rhythm into a fight can really mess somebody up. In fact, Capoeira has seen success in the UFC, so it's not something to scoff at, you know? And this acrobatic kind of involvement with the martial art also really influences its explosiveness and its power. You got some of the strongest kicks with Capoeira, which is why it's probably it might be considered pretty high up here, to be honest, if it weren't for, well, the lack of variety. You pretty much only focus on, well, strikes. A lot of kicks. There's a lot of evasion in Capoeira, sure. But even though it also has quite a lot of UFC representation, classes aren't exactly known to be full of sparring. It's more game-like, more like a dance, right? I might drop it down to C tier, just because, again, if you were to only learn Capoeira, you're missing out on quite a bit. I think it needs to be met with something else as well. It can't just be Capoeira. It would be kind of like the same as having just Taekwondo, but rather than really focusing on kicks, there's also this other cultural influence, which is really cool, but Capoeira really puts the art in martial arts. In fact, you can find Capoeira schools that are pretty much just dance classes. Those exist, which this is why it maybe be a little, don't think D or E tier means that you're just awful. These tiers still matter in their own ways. I'm just saying, if you only learn Capoeira, probably gonna run into some problems. Alright, Krav Maga. Now originally, Krav Maga was invented by a Hungarian Jew who was fighting off fascists in the 1930s. But then the IDF picked it up and kind of turned it into their own official combat system. Krav Maga's main focus is self-defense, like just dirty combat, straight to survival. You go for vital targets, you know, eyes, throats, the groin, go for the knees, oh god, I shouldn't have done that, uh-oh. And not only that, it's also designed to teach you these things within a short period of time. It's not trying to go for technique, it's trying to go for survival. But that starts to run into some problems. People will take a Krav Maga class for like a couple months and then think that they're Jason Bourne. It also never really gets pressure tested because Krav Maga people will be like, oh, it can't be in the ring, it'll kill somebody, rah. I tried to kill, not to score a point, you know? And because of that, the quality of classes can vary greatly. I've seen quite a lot of Krav Maga techniques that that wouldn't work, that's gonna get you killed, alright? Especially because Krav Maga deals with knives and guns, which you would think that Krav Maga is the superhero martial arts because you're actually dealing with street situations, guns, knives, right? Realism. And it is a complete system as well because you do train with knives and you train some grapples and you train a little bit of strikes and a little bit of everything for the purposes of plain survival. But when it comes down to the actual techniques, it's just like you're trying to go against an opponent who isn't fighting back, like, at all or something. Alright, Ninjitsu. Ninjitsu, it just means the art of stealth, or the art of perseverance. One of the two. It's another complete system, by the way, or an even more complete system with, like, espionage and stealth and survival and everything included in here. If only you could actually take a class that was real ninjitsu like anywhere at all. This is like the only thing you're gonna find for ninjitsu is complete hullabaloo, complete dog water. All right, maybe not. Maybe there's a couple ancient masters hiding somewhere out there ready to take on like 2 or 3 star pupils. But you're not signing up for a ninjitsu class and then learning the kinds of things you hear about when you hear about ninjitsu. The only thing, ninjitsu exists and it lives on in mostly cosplayers and LARPers. So I don't really know where to place ninjitsu. Because I'm trying to consider like what you at home could go take, invest your money into taking. Now, I just don't even know if there is like I'm gonna look this up right now. Can I look up a ninjitsu class? I'll go to someplace, a different state. Okay, you know what? Never mind. You know what? Ninjitsu. There's no such thing as a ninja class anymore. All right, it just that's not happening. If you want to do ninjitsu, I don't know. Go out to the woods and figure it out. All right, Systema. Oh, we got another problematic martial arts here. Okay, so Systema. It literally just means the system. It's a Russian martial arts for the Russian military. So you would think, ooh, pretty cool. But this is another one of those martial arts that we don't. Well, it gets heavily embellished. It was originally for Spetsnaz, but when brought into the civilian world, it was just kind of turned into a big joke. Like this is where you're gonna see a lot of those no-touch knockout people and moving with the flow. You know, it's all about flow. It's all about the system. It's all about the system. You gotta follow the system, the flow. It tries to stay really relaxed and fluid, which is correct in its theory when it comes to striking in martial arts and whatnot. But you get a wide variety, a wide range of quality when it comes to Systema practitioners, and the majority of that range is on the low end, unfortunately. And this is another kind of a thing that you're gonna have a pretty hard time following or finding any kind of a school for it. Systema might be another E tier, damn. I mean, I'll look it up. We'll do it again. Well, it at least has one class in New York, so that's one more than Ninjitsu. But then we just have to deal with all the other problems that Systema has besides not being able to find a class. Alright, Jeet Kune Do. I've been waiting to talk about this one, alright? Jeet Kune Do was founded by Bruce Lee himself. However, it's not really a martial art. It's more of a philosophy. Jeet Kune Do meaning the way of the intercepting fist, but the philosophy of Jeet Kune Do is to take what works and discard what doesn't from a wide variety of practices. You could see Jeet Kune Do as like the original MMA. Speaking of which, the reason MMA isn't on here is because MMA just means mixed martial arts. That would be like doing a favorite crayon compilation and then putting the crayon box on the list. Like that's not really okay. Jeet Kune Do. It was pretty ahead of its time, right? But the reason it's here is also because it's kind of a martial art in a way because, well, people just kind of mimicked the same thing that Bruce Lee was doing and rolled with it themselves. Which kind of ended up defeating the purpose of Jeet Kune Do if you just rigify it into a structured training all over again. For Bruce Lee's sake, we're going to go ahead and take it in its original principle. Which, if that's the case, then all of this entire tier list so far, and these two down here, are Jeet Kune Do. You could take Systema, Ninjitsu, Kendo, Aikido, Krav Maga, Wing Chun, Capoeira, and Taekwondo. All of them. You can take them all. Take the things that worked for you, discard everything else, and then all those things that worked from everything else, that's your Jeet Kune Do. I just messed up the list again. Hold on. So because of that, I'm gonna put it at S tier. Jeet Kune Do is an easy S tier because, well, this is the best martial arts philosophy. Because everybody's body is a little bit different, right? In boxing, it would be better to be a taller, stronger person. You got the range that you need and the strength. A short person is going to struggle with boxing, but they're going to find a lot more success with wrestling because they're shorter to the ground with a lower center of gravity, moving a larger lever. There's so many tiny little differences in the human body that makes technique work differently for different people. So because of that, you know, maybe the way you learn how to do a sidekick in Kung Fu works better for you than the way you learn how to do a sidekick in Taekwondo. The main problem is that there's not really like a universal curriculum for Jeet Kune Do or anything like that. Like you're not finding a school for it because it's a philosophy. Secondly, that could be pretty difficult to, you know, spend a lot of time in each of these different schools and a lot of money on a bunch of different schools. That way you can take, you know, what works and what doesn't. Furthermore, maybe you do have the money to go to a class, but you don't have the time. Problem that you might run into is, well, a lack of depth into a particular topic. But those are more individualistic problems. I think philosophically, Jeet Kune Do is the S tier martial art. With that said, let's move on to kickboxing. Kickboxing came about when boxers around like the 1960s and whatnot started mixing karate with boxing. And then later it became heavily influenced by Muay Thai. Kickboxing is just boxing but open, a little bit more open. As a result, there's a lot of different flavors of kickboxing. It's a relatively open term. It's boxing, but now you can use your feet, which comes with all of the benefits boxing has, but now you can use your feet. However, this also means that it has the same cons that boxing has, which is that it's sport-oriented. You're not doing any grappling or going to the ground, so. But it definitely covers more than just base boxing. I think a kickboxer in a random street fight is gonna win more people, more thugs, than a boxer is, maybe. I don't know, because I don't see kickboxers going out and fighting a bunch of random thugs all the time, so this is speculative. But if boxing is great for all it does with your hands, kickboxing is great for all it does for your hands and your feet, alright? And it really helps that kickboxing takes influence from other martial arts like karate and Muay Thai. It's a lot more loose in its practice because it's just boxing, but you could use more limbs. So I think that can be comfortably up here with Muay Thai and Jeet Kune Do. Except, nah, we're gonna have to drop it down to A tier. I'm sorry, kickboxing. Muay Thai is more complete than kickboxing. It also has grapples and whatnot, so we're kicking it down a bit. You're just punches and kicks. Just punches and kicks. Alright, A tier. Solid A tier. And last but not least, we have Judo. So Judo came about with another kind of frame of mind similar to the founder of Muay Thai, where they wanted to make it as effective as possible. Cut out all the baloney, everything else in between. He wanted it to be super effective, educational, and safe to practice at full speed. So on one hand, you do get to practice this at full sparring like efficacy and not have too bad of repercussions. But on the other hand, you're not learning the most dangerous stuff because you can't practice that at full speed, right? So it's got strengths and it's got cons. You're gonna be really, really good at this non-lethal type of attacks, which is really good for a superhero. But unfortunately, it is going to weigh it down a little bit because, well, you may not always be able to control the level of threat that somebody else is presenting. And sometimes lethality is a requirement, and Judo explicitly leaves out that lethality for the practice, right? So I'm not gonna give it like a lower score because it cuts that stuff out. It does still full body spar thanks to cutting that stuff out. And I mean, if you got into a life and death situation, you're not gonna suddenly, you know, hesitate to fight for your life just because you've trained to tap somebody. I mean, okay, well, that actually does happen. There are instances of trained fighters trying to tap somebody who's legitimately fighting them. It's that's kind of funny, but for the most part, you know, when that survival mode comes on, you don't think about that. Oh, I gotta train my sparring way. You know, that doesn't really come out so much. So we'll drop Judo comfortably in B tier. Yeah, I feel like that's fair. And ignoring some heavy biases, that is the tier list for martial arts and superhero efficacy. Okay, yeah, that's gonna do it. I highly recommend this one, and this one, and this one, I think. Any martial art here is gonna be better than no martial art whatsoever, and all of these are gonna work differently for you, alright? Every martial art works different for every type of a body. That's why this one is also S tier, huh? We went over that in the video you just watched. I feel like the internet makes tier lists feel like if it's not an A or S tier, it's useless, it's just complete garbage. But first off, C's get degrees, okay? So this is still a good tier. And furthermore, when it comes to martial arts especially, any of these things can be applicable, depending on who's learning it, okay? Only a small percentage of the population has ever done any martial arts, and of those people, an even smaller percentage are currently practicing right now. I am willing to put money that getting a yellow belt in Aikido is gonna put you at least a couple steps ahead of the dude who has a black belt in icy red fu. That was dumb. That was stupid. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry. Look, getting really angry and being really strong isn't a martial art. These, this, that, and especially all those are martial arts. Point is, don't let the tier list format discourage you from trying out something unique, okay? You gotta find what works for you, first and foremost. But the reason why I want you to consider this and why you should be thinking about a class to go to, I don't want you just thinking, oh, I'm gonna experiment with videos on Kendo. No. That's a big no-no. Unfortunately, you can only get so far with learning online, okay? When it comes to technique, there is a lot of very small micro movements that come together to generate power. If you practice this at home without somebody who's experienced to constantly correct you, you run the risk of building a bad habit and throwing a weak punch, being all. That was even a little. I've used my body a little too much. Okay, nobody's gonna teach you that in a YouTube video. Don't get me wrong. But you know what? You could end up you could. And then nobody's there to fix you, so you just end up getting into it one day and you're like throwing it straight and you're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You learned off of YouTube. That's what you're doing. So I really want you to find a good school, which means that you really have to consider what you're going to be paying money to go to, because these are not cheap. Oh boy. Yeah, no. Yeah, speaking of which, subscribe to help me afford more of that and more of these videos, YouTube videos. Look, I got a day job that takes up too much of my time.
Subscribe to Skyline to help superheroes against the forces of evil.